It's very rare for a show to leave behind it the kind of legacy that X Factor has after its 15 complete seasons on television. The show has been responsible for launching the careers of countless musicians, introducing the world to the kind of talent that leaves an audience breathless, and providing a platform for artists to prove themselves in front of the biggest names in the music industry. And now, after an impressive run that changed countless lives, it's time to officially bid the show farewell. There's something to be said about how Simon Cowell, for a good few years there, had mastered what it takes to make a reality TV competition successful. But then, one wonders, why was the show cancelled in the first place? What exactly is it that leads to the downfall of a show like that? Well, join us as we take a closer look at the real reason X Factor ended.
You're only here once, I wanna live with
We can't talk about a show like X Factor without talking about its creator, who's been the beating heart of the operation since day one. Born in England, Simon Philip Cowell is the brains behind some of the most successful operations in the music industry. As it turned out, he was offered to be a judge on the show Pop Idol after working as a producer in the late 80s and 90s, an opportunity that pushed Simon to widespread fame as an honest yet charming judge, one that the audience was excited to hear from. The show aired in 2001 and was the brainchild of Simon himself and a friend who shared the same name, Simon Fuller. This, combined with his appearance as a judge on American Idol in 2002, is what cemented his ability to be a cutthroat critic and therefore a great judge. It can be confidently said that without Simon's success on these shows, X Factor would not exist. This is because Simon eventually founded Psycho Entertainment, a record label that has since signed some of the most well-known names in the music industry. Then, using the Psycho label and its popularity as its foundation, Simon Cowell created the X Factor, produced by Fremantle's Talkback Thames. So, in all its glory, the X Factor premiered on the 4th of September in 2004 and ran for 15 seasons, comprising of 445 episodes in total. And despite what the show's rating landscape seemed like in the later seasons, when it first premiered, people would genuinely anticipate X Factor's return year after year. As mentioned, the show was responsible for launching the careers of incredibly talented individuals, mainly via notable contestants being signed with Simon's label Psycho Entertainment, and eventually making it big mainstream. There's no better example of this than One Direction. The boy band didn't actually end up winning the singing competition, yet Simon signed them, and before splitting up in 2015, the group had achieved more milestones than most musicians can only dream of achieving in their entire lives. The same could be said about Leona Lewis and Little Mix, both winners of the show and consistent chart toppers. In fact, the X Factor format was successfully sold to numerous territories around the world, with the US also having their own version between 2011 and 2013. In terms of its ratings, X Factor has always had its ups and downs. While the first season of the original UK-based X Factor had subpar ratings, the show started to steadily make a name for itself, and by the second season it had managed to attract an average of over 8 million viewers during its broadcast, a number that gradually and consistently went up each season as more and more people tuned in. The show achieved its peak viewing figures by its 7th series, which claimed its average viewing figures being over 14 million viewers, and its live finale achieved a peak audience of 19.4 million viewers. By 2010, the X Factor final was the only non-sporting event that reached the list of most-watched TV shows. And in its prime, the show has hosted stars like Rihanna, George Michael, Lady Gaga, and Beyoncé, who duetted with Alexandra Burke. One of Whitney Houston's final appearances was also on the X Factor. Which is why, at first glance, it was surprising that X Factor ever halted its production at all. In 2018, it was announced that the X Factor was not going to be renewed for another season the following year, to polarizing responses. But if we take a slightly deeper look into the show's popularity, it's easy to understand why the network deemed it fit to scrap the show. There are many reasons why the show decided to call it quits, the most obvious of which is its steadily declining ratings starting from 2011. There's no simpler way to explain why a show might decide to call it quits than to pull out viewing records. And there's no denying that X Factor saw its share of hard days. By 2017, the show's ratings were worse than they'd ever been, with the average viewing figures plummeting to a low 5.3 million by December of 2018. Another reason could perhaps be linked to just how carefully curated content needs to be nowadays. Shows like America's Next Top Model have recently come under heat for their harsh treatment of contestants in their older episodes. An insider revealed that one of the main reasons the plug was pulled was because producers were becoming increasingly confined in what they could and couldn't air. In the past, producers apparently would not have given a second thought to putting someone on a stage who'd embarrass themselves and give them a chase to increase their ratings. But in today's day and age, producers need to be very careful about the kind of content they put out. Even Simon's Mr. Nasty act wouldn't fly with many contestants now, as everyone prefers a gentler judging panel. Besides this, controversy has always surrounded the show in one form or another, and the truth is, when the show was popular, it could afford to disregard the outrageous claims made against it. However, that's no longer the case. In 2004, reports of the show's audition process being unfair started coming out, and even before the first live show, Simon himself was accused of rigging the show and editing footage on purpose by Osborne, who later retracted his complaints. On another occasion, Louis Walsh announced that he'd been bullied by his fellow judges at the time. In June of 2020, Misha Bryan, a semi-finalist on the 8th season of the show, took to social media to talk about her experience on the show. She put out a statement that stated that the X Factor producers saw an opportunity to tear down a black girl that came from a broken home and worked together to assassinate my character and to sabotage my career by orchestrating lies. She also added that she was suffering and diagnosed with PTSD before and after the competition. She also specifically called out judges Talisa and Louis Walsh for making remarks on live television about Misha being a bully in the third week of the live shows, a claim Walsh later apologized for. In 2020, another contestant was on the show. Pink tribute artist Zoe Alexander of Season 9 stated that she felt mistreated and misrepresented during the audition process. She claimed that the production encouraged situations whereby the contestants faced discomfort just to get an intense emotional response on camera. She also claimed that the show had intentionally framed her in a negative light. Rebecca Ferguson, the runner-up for Season 7 of the show, has also talked about the mistreatment she faced as a contestant on the show and with the label she signed to. There's nothing more tragic than overstaying when it's your time to leave. X Factor over the years has also been criticized for being a soap opera more than it is a search for real talent. Celebrities have joined the bandwagon. Sting called the show televised karaoke and claimed that the contestants are encouraged to conform to the stereotypes. The lead singer for the band Blur also criticized the show for creating a mindset that suggests you can get something for nothing and that it's easy to acquire status and fame. Even Calvin Harris has called the show a joke and said that Simon Cowell had a frightening stranglehold on the British charts, further stating that Simon is not really a music fan and the show lacks musical creativity. Despite being cancelled before, it wasn't until 2021 that X Factor was finally and officially cancelled. The news came from Dermot O'Leary, a longtime host of the show. Of course, before having to give up the show, Simon tried to release a few spin-offs, but unfortunately, none of them took off, and a source close to Simon apparently reported that he wanted to really think through the show and how to reinvigorate it for the future. He also said that he believed that the show had lost sight of the contestants and focused too much on spending millions and millions of pounds putting together the perfect panel of judges. After this in-depth look into why the show might have been cancelled, there appears to be one remarkably straightforward explanation. The truth may just be that the show had run its course, and there's something so satisfying about the fact that the X Factor has left behind 15 years of its legacy, a legacy that through its ups and downs acts as a case study for the ever-evolving landscape of the entertainment industry.